There is a really big lie told by millions of people around the world daily. And I would be willing to bet that there are people in here who have told this lie repeatedly. Are you ready for it? I have read and agree to the terms and conditions. How many of you read through every single bit of fine print that can scroll for pages at a time? What do? You just put that check mark on there and you're like, let's get on with it. Covenant. It's a word that we don't use very often, but that's what it is. It's an agreement to terms and conditions. A covenant is an agreement between two parties. And guess who gets to set the terms on the agreement? It's the person who has the most power. The more powerful of the two parties gets to set the terms and the conditions. Now, God has chosen to make an agreement with the world. And just saying that out loud should be shocking to you. That the almighty creator God that we just sang the praises of would bind himself to a contract with his creation. I mean, who are we that he would even consider our thoughts on any matter? He is so wonderful. And yet he did. He said, let's make an agreement. So now this is public confession time. I assume your laughter was that you've all checked the box without reading the terms and conditions. But let's have a confession here. Between God and us in an agreement, who is the most powerful? Okay, if you believe that, it's one thing to know it in your head. It's another thing to believe it in your heart. If you believe that, then you're on the right track here when it comes to a covenant with God. He gets to set the terms. He gets to set the expectations of a covenant, of an agreement, of a contract legally binding with us. And you know what he did for the Old Testament, the Old Covenant, the Old Agreement? It was the first 5 books of your Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. You think a little fine print at the end of a software update is too much to read? Imagine reading the Torah, which the Israelites were supposed to do. Every 7 years, they were supposed to gather and sit and read the contract, which had over 600 individual laws. And these laws were not bad laws. They were designed to separate the Israelites from the nations around them. God is the one who gets to set the terms, and he knows what perfection is because he's perfect and we're not. And so he sets these laws saying, this is the life you, O Israel, are supposed to live and give. This is the life you're supposed to give other people. They're supposed to see your lives and say, wow, those people of God, of Yahweh, they've got something that I want. And so they're supposed to come to you and say, how can I be a part of your people? And then you give them the contract. And they go, wow, that's a lot. What's that knife for? Don't worry about it. You'll see it when we get to Abraham and the covenant of circumcision. Just read on. There are a lot of laws. And the nation of Israel stopped giving out this law. They actually stopped living this law. It was a law that was written in stone and written in ink. You want to be a part of God's people, you need to go through this first agreement. Now, that may seem to some people to be a little burdensome. I guess perfection is burdensome. I thought some of you in here can agree perfection must be difficult for you. It's not for me. I've never tried it. But the idea that God would give a law that applies to the whole world and use the Israelites to give it to others, that seems like, man, you know what? Maybe it's better to not have the law at all. Maybe it's better not to enter into an agreement with God. So some people try that. They say, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pretend like the contract doesn't exist, that God doesn't exist, and I'm going to do my own thing. Do you think that's going to work for people at the end of time? It's not, and I'll tell you why. Let's suppose that you decide, you know what I don't like? Speed limits. I don't agree to them. You know what else I don't like? Car insurance. Don't like paying it. Don't want it. Don't agree to it. I don't like driver's licenses. Don't want them. I agree to none of these things. That's a contract for somebody else. Rules for thee, not for me. Do you suppose that argument is going to work? Not if, but when you get pulled over. Whenever the cop writes the ticket and you go, you don't understand, officer, I don't agree to the terms and conditions. I think he's probably going to write you another one, actually, just for all the paperwork he's going to do you. When you get pulled over. Now, some people would say that seems unfair. It seems unfair that God in his perfection would place that expectation upon us. But it's not to hold you down. It's to actually lift you up and give you a life that he knows is best for you. The Apostle Paul was an early follower of Jesus. Not one of the immediate followers. He missed and did not join in the ministry of Jesus. But after the resurrection of Jesus, Jesus appeared to him, and Paul was all about this Old Testament, this Old Covenant, all of these books, all of these laws, and then Jesus comes to him and says, my ministry is better because I fulfilled all of those laws. Jesus took his name. God in the flesh took his name and wrote it at the bottom of the contract and fulfilled it. And that contract is completely fulfilled. It's filed away. It's done. And now we have a new contract, a new covenant, a new agreement with God. And so then people were in the New Testament, Old Testament changeover. And they were saying, well, what does this mean about the law? Does that mean it was bad? Does that mean it was burdensome? And Paul encourages people. He takes this issue head on and says, what shall we say then? Is the law, the Old Covenant, was it bad? Was it sinful? Certainly not. It was a gift to mankind to be more like God. Nevertheless, I would not have known what sin was if it had not been for the law. For I would not have known what covet was if the law had not said, you shall not covet. It's like the ancient philosophers, the Bobby Fuller Four, saying way back in 1966 in the ancient days. Finish it for me. I fought the law and the... Yeah. You know it. You know deep down you were created to be like God. And you know that those expectations of God are holy and they are just, and we just break it. Why give us a law that we couldn't keep? Why give us a law that would keep us down? Because God was showing us mercy. Which brings us to our core verse today. He knew that we couldn't keep this law. He knew that the Israelites would stop giving this law. He even had punishments for them, saying, if you stray from this law, which I know you're going to, there are going to be punishments. And in the book of Jeremiah, which is where our core verse comes from today, the Israelites are in the midst of the pain and the punishment of losing their nation because they strayed from God's ways. Babylon has taken them captive, torn down the temple where they were making sacrifices for the forgiveness of their sins. Can you imagine the dismantling of your forgiveness method right in front of your face? Burning the gates with fire so you could not defend yourself, and carrying the best and brightest of your nation away to Babylon. That is what they are experiencing right now, the full weight of their inability to keep the law. And in the middle of pain is a beautiful promise, which is our core verse. God says, this is the covenant I will make with the people of Israel after that time. Wait, a new covenant? Oh, man, we couldn't even keep the first one. Is there going to be like 10 books in this next one? Are there going to be double the laws? Are there going to be 1,200 of them? We couldn't even keep the first covenant, the first agreement, the first contract. Why is there going to be another one? But God says, I will put my law in their minds. I will write it on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. No longer will they teach their neighbor or say to one another, you need to know the Lord. You need to memorize all 600 of these laws because you don't want to break any of them. It was holiness by osmosis. Maybe if you just sleep on the Bible, it'll somehow get into your body some way. It was an exterior holiness that we could not hold. And God says, that system is going to go away because everybody will know me. From the least of the kingdom, from the poorest pauper to the greatest leader, every one of them will know me. Not just know about me. You see the difference there, right? I know about a lot of people. You can read about people. But knowing, you can read about people, but knowing someone famous, it's different. And so the Lord declares, I will forgive their wickedness and remember their sins no more. Wickedness and sin, by definition, is anything of the law that you do not keep. When you do not do the good things, and whenever you actually do the bad things, all of that, God says, I will remember it no more. Your and my inability to keep the old law will be forgiven. God is calling his shot because he knew that we could not get perfection on our own. But we needed to know that we could not get perfection on our own. Parents, you may be familiar with this. If you do everything for your kids, they're going to be pretty spoiled, they'll be unable to do anything. You're going to be good for nothing. You'll still love them, but sometimes you need them to see how much they need you. You know, they're like, wow, I really need your help on this. Yes, you do. And I'm happy to give it because I'm a loving parent. We needed to see our need for God. In an attempt to save money on my car insurance, I didn't switch to Geico, but I did download an app that was going to monitor my driving. And you know what I expected this app to tell me? Mr. Dwyer, wow. Whew. You are a perfect driver. We are fortunate to have you as a customer. In fact, we should pay you. Why don't you come on to some of our commercials? You make no mistakes ever. Is that what the app told me? The app said, you're not perfect. In fact, here are some videos you could watch to improve. And I think, you know what, I'm not a bad driver, I'm a good driver. Am I perfect? Am I never at fault? I'm not. How long would it take the keepers of the law, those who understood the holiness and perfection of God, how long would it take for them to realize, oh, there's a big difference between being better drivers than other people and being perfect? And there's a standard of perfection that I am not living up to. How long did it take Israel? How long does it take you? How long does it take us to realize, wow, I'm not perfect. I know God is, and I know that I am not. And some of us here today may still be living under the unrest and the burden of trying to keep a perfect law. Some people, I'm afraid, may be, if you're watching this now online later, you may be thinking, you know what, I don't want any part of any contract whatsoever. I'm sorry. He created the whole world. His laws apply to the whole world. And some of you may be thinking, here's what I'll do. I'll just try to be good enough. I'll try to let my good outweigh my bad. It doesn't work that way. The cost and the terms of the agreement in this contract is perfection and perfection only. And so this new covenant is described in your Core 52 book on page 111 like this. The law of Moses was like an electric fence. It jolted everyone who crossed the barrier. Under the new covenant, the Spirit inside of us, the reprogramming of our hearts, is very different. He's more like a compass than an electric fence. You know, whenever I make a mistake in my car, my app doesn't just like shut the whole car down and like eject me. It just says, that was a mistake. And I go, yeah, that was a mistake. I mean, I may argue with it a little bit. No, it wasn't a mistake, but it was. And then I learn. And I try to attain perfection because I know that I can't. This is not about trying to attain the perfection of the Old Testament because you can't. It's about living under the guidance of the new law of God. And so some people actually reject this new covenant. There's a new agreement with people, and some people go, nope, don't want it. Give me back the 5 books. Give me back the 600 plus laws. I'll take that, please. Instead of one life lived for you. Instead of 600 laws, you can have one law, which is love the Lord your God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And you show that by how you love other people. One life, one love. And some people say, no thanks. It makes me uncomfortable. I want the old way back, please. It sounds crazy, but it still happens today. People thinking they will try to get to heaven on their own merit instead of accepting the gift of God through Jesus Christ. In Luke's biography of Jesus' life, we read what happens, what Jesus says to people who would come to him and say, hey, I will follow you. Or I will follow you when. Instead of just saying, I will follow you and laying down their lives, they always had these little caveats. And so Jesus told a parable. He told a parable, which we're going to get to in a second. But Jesus, when he's talking to people, says that no one pours new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the new wine will burst the skins, and the wine will run out, and wineskins will be ruined. Now, I know you all have wineskins hanging up in your houses, and so you're fully aware what a wineskin is. A wineskin is exactly what it sounds like. It's animal skin sewn together that holds wine. And so you put new wine, grape juice, and the spices and ingredients into fresh animal skin because there's a fermentation process that expands the wine. And thankfully, with the new wineskins, there's a little flex still in the animal skin, and so it will expand with the wine, and everything will be great. How many times can you do that process with the wineskin? One time. Because the moment you stretch that wineskin all the way to its limit, and then you try to pour a new batch inside of it, it's going to just explode. And we understand something like this because we have something similar today. Do not put carbon pressurized cans in your car in the wintertime, or in the heat for that matter. Why? You're going to ruin the soda, you're going to ruin the container, you're going to ruin your car. And Jesus says you cannot put something that is new into something that has already been used and fulfilled. You cannot put his new spirit and his new covenant in an already satisfied system. It's done. It is finished. And the funny thing about this is he's not talking to the pagan atheists or the polytheists for that matter. He's not even talking to the Pharisees who set themselves up against his ministry. When he says you can't put new wine in old wineskins, he's talking to the disciples of John. John the Baptist's ministry was to pave the way for the Messiah. He even said, there he is. That's the Messiah. He's the one who takes away the sins of the world, and every good Jew remembers the promise of Jeremiah that I will forgive their sins. And so these disciples of John have heard him say, he's the one, ushering in the new covenant, and they still come to Jesus right before he tells the parable of the wineskins, and he says, and the disciples say to him, how come your disciples act differently than us? How come they do things, how come you teach them differently than the way our teacher teaches us? And Jesus says, because you're trying to double down on something old. But I have come to make everything new. And you cannot accept what I am doing and how I'm going to improve your life and expand your life. You cannot accept it if you're still trying to hold on to these old things in your life. Now, we like to think, I totally would have got it. I totally would have understood it. I have yet to meet somebody who was like, yeah, I totally probably would have been a rejecter of Jesus. Nobody thinks that. They're like, I totally would have been down for the Old Testament, New Testament changeover. I would have understood. Why didn't those people back then understand? But I think if we're honest, you have to ask yourself the question, when was the last time you let Jesus teach you anything new? If you haven't learned anything new in a while or been comfortable with God expanding your life, you might need to ask yourself, am I still holding on to something old? Something that may have been good at the time, But God is continuing to expand his kingdom. Am I making room in my life for it? Because if you've already filled yourself to the top of your discipleship and you've achieved it, congratulations. The rest of us, no. We need God to expand us, to grow us. We need to expand our comfort zones. Thankfully, we can learn from those people who came to Jesus and said, I will follow you, but. Because Jesus told them this parable. No one who puts a hand to the plow and looks back is fit for service in the kingdom of God. Because people were coming to him and saying, I will follow you, but first let me go bury my father. Which you may think, well, that's kind of, could Jesus not have compassion on this man? I mean, if his father just died, could he not just go ahead and bury him and then follow him? What the man was saying is, like, my father's still alive, and I don't know exactly when he's going to die, but whenever he dies and I get the inheritance and then my life is in place, then I'll follow you. I don't know when I'll have everything together, but when I have everything together, I will follow you. And Jesus says, you got it all wrong. We don't know when the end of our lives is coming. I'm the one who helps you get everything together. And so it's like saying, I will follow you, Jesus, but I'm still going to look back at these old things that used to bring me comfort, this old system. You may have to give up something. I don't know if anybody's told you this lately. You may have to give up something in order to follow Jesus. Another question that follows, when was the last time Jesus taught you something? When was the last time you gave up something in order to make room for his expansion in your life? Because Jesus told him a parable about a man who held a great banquet. And he sent out the invitations. And people gave all kinds of excuses. They said, well, I just bought a field. Let me go check it out first before I follow you. Wait a minute, you already bought it. It's an excuse. Well, I just bought these oxen. I got to go make sure they were a good financial decision, so please excuse me from your banquet. Let me get my finances in order first, because I kind of want to hold on to my money. And then Jesus says, you cannot serve both God and money. One person said, well, I just got married, so I can't. The old ball and chain. And Jesus says, your relationship's not the chain, your sin is. Don't let an earthly relationship keep you from a relationship with Jesus. You know what? Jesus wants you and that person. He wants you to bring them both. All of them. Your whole family. Your friends. Bring them all. Don't let them be an excuse to stay away from him. Do not let anything here on earth, anything old, keep you from getting something new and greater. So I got to ask, again, public confession time. Which is a greater priority? The things of the old which will pass away, or the new and eternal? Old or new? But we like the old. It's comfortable. It's broken in. I understand them. You know what it takes to come over here to Jesus' new side in the New Testament and his expansion in your life? It takes this thing called trust. It may be unfamiliar, but that's okay. Peter, one of Jesus' first followers, encouraged Christians with these words about what's going to happen to all of the old things. He said, but the day of the Lord will come like a thief. The heavens will disappear with a roar, the elements will be destroyed by fire, and the earth and everything done in it will be laid bare. If your hands are full of things that are going to pass away, you're going to find eternity to be very difficult, because you're going to walk into it completely empty and unprepared. Perhaps you've heard this verse before. However, it is written, what no eye has seen, no ear has heard, and what no human mind has conceived, the things God has prepared for those who love him. And when you've heard that verse from somebody who was probably well and loved you, they probably were talking about heaven, because you have no idea how great it's going to be, and that's true. But the very next verse tells us that this is not about someday, it's about today. Those things that no mind could comprehend, are the things that God has revealed to us by His Spirit. The Spirit searches all things, even the deep things of God. You want to know how your heart of stone can be replaced with a heart of flesh? How you can download and reprogram your heart through a new covenant? It's through the Spirit of God. You can have the Spirit of God reveal things to you that the people of the Old Testament would never have comprehended. I like to say it like this. I'd like to think whenever we get to heaven, there's going to be so many people that want to know, what was it like to go into the Red Sea when it was parted? What was it like to see the pillars of fire? What was it like to see all the miracles? And I think the Old Testament people would say, you realize that we were longing for the Messiah and the new covenant. Why don't you tell us what it was like, not to worship God in a temple, but what it was like to worship God in spirit and in truth? There were so many people throughout history who longed for what we neglect so often. And maybe there are some people in here today, myself included, who need to make room for Him to expand in our lives. People rejected Jesus because they wanted the old days, and some Christians want to fast forward to the someday. But you can have things in the new covenant revealed to you today. But it may cost you. Remember, there are terms and conditions to this agreement. Another way to say it is this: you cannot have your past and God's future. You cannot take the forgiveness and the love and the ministry of God for granted. Try to force it into your system of legalism. It'll destroy it. It'll wreck your faith. This new covenant points to an eternity. You need to replace your fear of leaving the old with faith. Faith in what Jesus did when He gave His perfect life. Remember, perfection was the cost of the old covenant. When He gave His perfect life to fulfill that covenant, you need to believe that. You move from fear to faith, and that faith is what moves you into forever. Living a beautiful life with God now, today, until there are no more days. So I have to ask, and don't just be hasty with this answer. Do you agree to the terms and the conditions? Because when you do, you'll want to put this check mark down. What is a check mark? I mean, you've all probably done it. You start and you go down, and then you come back up higher than you were before, right? Everybody just get your hands out. Do this. Go down, and you go higher. Oh, fantastic. You did. What about this? It seems to me like whenever you want to say, I accept the terms and conditions, you go down, and then you come back up higher and greater than you were before. I'm going to be over here in this room, right next door. And if any of you, maybe you've never made this decision to put the little check by the terms and conditions and say, I know there was an old covenant of perfection that was written in stone and in ink, but I want the new one of flesh and blood. I believe, but I've never stated it. I have understood the terms and the conditions, and I want this new life. I will be over there. I would love to pray with you as the band comes up to sing a few more songs. Don't let anything or anyone try to keep you in an old way that will lead to a dead end. Accept the new life and the new covenant that God has for you today. Let's pray.